Hello, everybody. How you doing? I'm like, I said hello. Everybody's head. So I appreciate all of you for being here. So I thank you for coming, but I really thank you for manifesting this moment. Okay. Now I'm going to talk about divinity, but I'm going to throw some tidbits about manifestation in there as well, because my teaching, the fundamentals of manifestation, is really understanding your nature is to manifest. That's why you're here, to create. All right. So I'm going to break down what that looks like. I'm going to talk about the universe, consciousness, going to compare you between the universe and yourself, and then you're going to see the correlation between the two. All right. So I brought my book here just to keep me on task, because I only have 30 minutes. I can probably talk for hours about this. All right. So bear with me for looking down if I have to. My name is Peter Abundant. I go by Dr. Abundant. I have a PhD in metaphysical science. A lot of people ask me, where'd you get that degree from? There's a couple of colleges in California. There's an online program. If you're curious and interested, you can Google them and look them up, right? Now, for me, my journey started 30 years ago. I know you're probably saying, but he looks like he's 25. So I'm actually 46 years old. When I was in high school, I started to get to this point in my life where I was really questioning my relationship with God. And I say that because at that age, I only identified with being Christian. I only understood connections with God through religion. I thought that was the only way to connect with God. But I was curious enough to not just accept the religion that was given to me, right, by my parents, which is traditionally the case. And I decided to investigate other religions. I said, well, if I'm going to choose one, like, I'm going to educate myself as to what it is that I'm going to choose, rather than what happens to most of us. Our parents tell us this is the right religion, and we just accept it. We accept it, and then we just take it as our reality. And there's nothing wrong with that. But we want to educate ourselves, and we want to be mindful about our journey, right? So I had an aunt. She was Muslim. She had a lot of kids, so I had many cousins who were also Muslim. Grew up with them. I found Islam interesting, fascinating, because it was a little bit different. At least it appeared different than traditional Christianity. So I took it upon myself. I spoke to my mother and I said, hey, I think I want to go and investigate these different religions. How can I do that? So we discovered that there was a Muslim school. I lived in New York. I'm from New York. There was a Muslim school in Queens, New York, Corona, Queens. So I attended this school to learn about the religion, learn about how it works, see if it resonates with me, if it speaks to me. And various aspects of it did. But then various aspects of it didn't. So taking that into consideration, I realized, okay, maybe there's something else. Let me look into another religion. So then I went to another school the next year, high school. I'm jumping from high school to high school, focused on different religions. So then I went to a Seventh-day Adventist high school. Now, that high school was interesting because it was away. It was like in a dorm. It was like almost like college setup. And I liked that because it took me away from home. It gave me an opportunity to learn from other people, other cultures. But more importantly, the religion itself was fascinating because growing up Christian, I understood some aspects of it, all right? And, okay, these things make sense. This makes sense. Even decided to baptize myself Seventh-day Adventist. But then eventually, I kept asking the questions. I kept looking more into it. I kept asking myself internally, does this feel right with me? Many things did, but many things did. But then I also started to see a pattern between Islam and Christianity. And so I started to see, some of these things are saying the same things fundamentally. So then that took me off into another journey, started looking into Buddhism, Baha'ism. I don't know if you're familiar with Baha'ism. And then that took me into metaphysical science ultimately. Then I realized, okay, these religions are basically languages. They're all saying the same thing. They're all wanting us to go to the same destination. They're just coming from different parts of the world, with different cultures is different, and this is how they communicate with the world. All right? But then I started to, let me backtrack a little bit. As a child, growing up Christian, there were certain things about Christianity that just stuck with me. God is everywhere. God is in everything. Jesus is the Son of God. And it was interesting because at that age, probably the age of my son, he's sleeping here with me. About 12 years. So about 12 years old, I was asking this question, well, if Jesus is the Son of God, he's a man, because that's how I saw him as a regular guy, then am I not also, right? Aren't you not also sons and daughters of God? Because I didn't think of it as a lot of people do with looking at Jesus. They look at him and put him on this pedestal. But in my mind, I saw him as a guy who was just tapped into something special. And so I saw it as an example that we can have that potential as well to tap into something special within us. So then carrying those same thoughts throughout my journey, looking at different religions, that stuck with me. And so it was really an understanding of seeing, okay, these things are speaking the same, basically sharing the same message, different terminologies, different words, different cultures, but they're saying the same thing fundamentally. That divinity that Jesus was able to achieve and express and share is within us all. Now, this isn't about religion. Okay, I'm just using that as an example to share my story with you. This is ultimately about going beyond just the religious aspects. I'm also not going to say that I'm against religion, because I'm not. I think religion is important for a lot of people. A lot of people need a book. They need to be told what to do. They need that guidance. And eventually, they may go beyond that. For some people, that's simply enough, and that's okay. Right? So, when it comes to, I mentioned manifestations of Lord. The story, I'm going to go back to Jesus again, because we all can identify with that story. He was basically a master at manifestation. That's the story, right? Water to wine, such and such. Now, when it comes to recognizing who you are, when we are in these kind of circles, we talk a lot about consciousness. My understanding is that consciousness is that divine expression of the universe, of this grand intelligence that we understand is out there, okay? But what I want you to understand is to not focus so much on the external, what's out there. You want to connect with that, definitely, but recognize that you connect with that by first connecting here with the divinity within you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down understanding that divinity within you, okay? Manifestation. Let's talk about manifestation again really quickly. Manifestation is always happening. You always create. We cannot just decide you're going to manifest something, okay? You came here today, you're manifesting this experience, right? When you wake up, you're manifesting something. When you brush your teeth, you're manifesting dental health, hygienic health. Okay, when you eat, you're manifesting vital life. All right? Even when you just simply go to the park and just sit there and try to be quiet and still, you're manifesting tranquility, peace. All right? Everything you do is creating something. You are constantly manifesting something, materializing something. The difference is, for many of us, it's unconscious. We're just doing it. A lot of times it stems from our subconscious programming, how we were blown up, and we're just kind of aimlessly going through this mundane routine of life. Now, when you come into understanding your consciousness and the power that you have, you recognize, okay, I have the ability to consciously manifest what it is that I want, what it is that resonates with me. That takes really looking at yourself, though. A lot of times when we look into manifestation, we want the superficial things, the usual stuff. Oh, I want the love of my life. I want $1 million. I want a house. I want to travel. But we don't really get into what really is going to authentically make me happy. Okay? And that's important. And you use the things that truly interest, like your passions, your talents, and things that you're curious about. I always say your curiosities are the breadcrumbs to your purpose. Whatever you're curious about, whether you think you're good at it or not, you just follow it. It'll lead you the way, okay? Just like your consciousness led you here, okay? It's leading you. Your consciousness is constantly trying to bring you to your purpose and your destiny. You just have to learn how to listen to it. But most times we are listening to our egos. We are listening to the parts of us that were programmed, right? What our parents told us, the things that happened to us in our lives when we were kids. But now you have to recognize, okay, there is something else calling you to try to understand yourself. That is the spiritual journey. All right. So we understand meditation is always happening. Always. You don't just read a book and decide you're going to start manifesting, creating things. You just simply decide that you're going to consciously do it. All right. So do we understand? Have we ever heard the phrase that we are the individual expressions of God or the divine source? Yeah? No? No? Okay. So I'm going to give you a few examples. When we think about nature, when we observe nature, well, first of all, we have an idea and understanding that there is something out there. There's some intelligence. There's something orchestrating this whole thing, right? We all believe that something is going on. We call it different things. We identify with it as something different, but ultimately there's something there. But when we look at nature, say, for example, food, an apple, right? Or we look at trees or animals. So when we look at an apple, if we take the seed of that apple and plant it, what is it going to grow? What's going to grow? An apple. If we take a dog and we breed it, what is it going to give birth to? A dog. Right. Okay. So as conscious beings, when we think about the source of who we are, we must come from something like us. We must come from something that is conscious, that is aware, that is intelligent. So when people think about the universe, a lot of times, especially the scientific or even atheist community, they just think it's just random, something just happened by accident, and there's nothing really out there. But when we break it down, we'll see that there is an intellect. There is something out there. So we're going to break that down. We're going to talk about the universe and examples of how the universe is self-aware. Okay, so we're going to start with the universe first. So one thing that we can use to understand that the universe is self-aware is complexities. Okay, the universe is complex. So when you think about the creation of the solar systems, galaxies, we think about the laws of physics, it demonstrates order. It demonstrates purpose. It demonstrates our thought pattern, right? Science is based on that. Science is basically wanting to understand the way the universe works. But a lot of times, scientists separate the spiritual aspect of it because they can't pinpoint. It's beyond them anyway, right? So a lot of people separate and just say, oh, it's just the universe. But we have to go further and go beyond just the superficial, tangible things because we know something underneath is happening. The second point, nature adapts. The fact that something adapts means that there's an intellect involved here, because otherwise it would just be constantly hitting yourself into the wall, right? And not figuring out a way to get around things. When you look at nature, for example, again, say a plant or, people may have your own property, you may have a garden or say, for example, a yard, and you try to get rid of like weeds, right? So you try to cover it up with some kind of canvas or something so that way it doesn't get sunlight, it doesn't get, you know what I'm talking about, it doesn't get light. You try to prevent it from growing, right? Because you're trying to cultivate a space, a look. You want particular things to grow. But what happens? Those weeds eventually find a way. They get around it. They're looking for a way to find the sunlight, to find the nutrients to grow. That's intellect. That's objective. That's purpose. Right? No matter what you do, that thing will get through somehow. When we think about, for example, natural disasters, right? We say disasters, but really that's our own projection because naturally, nature, the world, the earth, is just doing what it has to do to create balance for itself. We just happen to be in the way. And then we happen to judge it because it's inconvenient for us and we get hurt. Sometimes people die, and that's unfortunate. But nature is neutral. Nature is not really looking to be good or bad. It's just trying to find balance. Okay, we have to honor that balance. And I will come back later on in this discussion as far as how we relate and how we are compared to that thing. The third point would be everything has a purpose. Even for ourselves, we say this a lot, right? Everything has a purpose. Things happen for a reason, right? We say that, we kind of throw it out there, but we really don't sit and think about it. That really represents, there's a level of faith that we have and understanding that, okay, something's going on and we can surrender to it and allow it to happen. When we do that, we find that we're more peaceful with ourselves because we trust in this higher intelligence, right? And the higher intelligence really isn't something separate from us. That's what I'm getting to. It isn't separate from us. We identify it as something over there and we're over here, okay? And so the reason why we separate those things is because of our relationship with consciousness and our ego. All right, I'm going to get more into that soon. So let's compare the universe and self, right? The universe and yourself. We talked about the universe and the idea of it being self-aware. Let's talk about how we can compare ourselves to the universe and see the connection, all right? So the universe, let's talk about the beginning. Some people theorize the Big Bang was the beginning of the universe, right? Okay, we can take that in. Doesn't really make sense if the universe is infinite. Something had to start before the Big Bang. Well, we'll just start with the Big Bang for now. So the Big Bang, there was an explosion that happened. The universe was created. Still being created. They theorize the universe just constantly expanding, constantly going. All right? When you think about ourselves, what happened when we was conceived? The Big Bang. As a parents, it was banging, right? So banging, right? So it started with one cell that multiplied and expanded, continues to grow. You are continuing to grow and expand. You are continuing to change your body. Every 7 years, your cells regenerate and there's a new body there. So anytime you think about resetting your life, resetting your health, you can do it. Every 7 years, remember, you can have a whole completely new body, okay? But your expansion doesn't stop with just the physical. Your expansion is really about consciousness. You're expanding your consciousness, even coming here today, is a desire to expand, right? Your goals, your dreams, the things that you want, that is a representation of your expansion. So remember that. So you see the correlation between yourself and the universe, right? So when we talk about adaptation, balance, the universe is constantly balancing itself, say, for example, like with the weather, right? If it's not, enough moisture, hydration, it rains. Okay? Again, natural disasters. That's a form of balance. Global warming. That's an expression of the balance not being able to keep up with what's happening to it. All right? So when we compare it to ourselves, for example, the weather can be compared to our own immune system. Your immune system is constantly trying to balance itself. Right? When you think about natural disasters, you can even think about emotional coping mechanisms, right? You're constantly trying to figure out a way, even when you're not aware of it and you feel like you don't have the skills. Your body has many layers of intelligence that is just outside of your conscious mind. So it is trying to figure out a way to cope, all right? You're trying to figure out a way to balance. I mentioned global warming when it comes to nature. For us, is disease. All right, but we're not able to balance, and we're not able to come to a homeostasis, equilibrium, then the body begins to shut down because there's just too much. So those are the correlations between yourself and the universe. Finally, the contrast of the universe. Up, down, simple stuff. Up, down, left, right, the sun, the moon, wet, dry, right? Hot, cold. Everything has its opposite. That's just fundamental. Yin and yang. Everything has its opposite. Front, back. I always think about that. I listen to a guy named Alan Watts. He always talk about a front with no back. It's not possible. To me, that's just funny, just thinking about a person who has a front with no back. It was just like, what? But for us, the contrasts are in our consciousness and our ego. You see, your consciousness is the light part, whereas the ego is usually identifies as the dark side of who you are, right? Consciousness represents the true self, whereas the ego represents false self. So, I want to say that a lot of us, especially in the spiritual community, we villainize the ego. The ego is the thing that's causing us suffering. It is the worst. We need to kill the ego. Ego, death, ego, death. That's not my story. That's not what I'm saying, okay? Ego is necessary. We need the ego. I'm Peter. What's your name?
Robin.
Robin. The ego creates that, right? To be able to have a level of identity. It's important to have identity. The problem is we identify too much with the ego, right? So I'm going to break down consciousness versus ego right now, because I think that contrast is the most important part of our spiritual journey. And understanding those two things is really going to help, okay? So there's many layers of self. So the ego and the consciousness is a few of those layers. When I think about the layers of self, there's the ego, there's the conscious mind, subconscious mind, and then the higher mind. Some people reference it as the superconscious mind. Okay? So the ego and the conscious mind are constantly trying to balance one another, right? The ego and consciousness is trying to balance one another. Your conscious mind, your subconscious mind are kind of the bridges between those two. Okay? So if you're not familiar with conscious mind and subconscious mind, your conscious mind is analyzing everything that's happening right now. You're looking at it, you're looking at me, you're listening to me, you're coming up with an assumption, a conclusion. All right? You're taking that information, depending on how much energy is fueled with it. Like if I was to jump out and scare everybody, you're probably going to remember that for a long time. Right? Then that is stored in your subconscious. Okay? Just like when we were kids, I'm sure there was an event when you was a kid, something crazy happened. It could be a good thing or a bad thing, but you remember it because it was emotion. Right? That is then is stored in your subconscious mind. And it is stored in your subconscious mind as almost like a reflex mechanism. Okay? So that way when something similar happens, you immediately have a trigger or reaction. Okay, it's kind of like a protective mechanism, right? You think about before we were living in society, when we were living out in the woods and trying to survive. You know, you're a little kid, you see somebody got killed by a lion, that emotional thing is stored in your mind. So next time you see a lion, immediately, before you can even think about it, you're running, because that was a program that was stored in your subconscious. So the same thing is happening to us, right? So a lot of times things happen, we react, and we're like, I don't know why I did that. Because it was stored in your subconscious. Okay. Wow. I've been through the old times she'll go about bad. All right. So, do we understand that concept? Yeah. Okay. So to me, there's I call it a divine conversation happening between all of these levels of who you are. And a lot of times that's why we feel conflict, confusion, because we're trying to balance all these things out. Now, what you want to achieve on your spiritual journey is that alignment of balance. Okay? And it takes work. It takes time. You got to really look at your triggers, look at yourself, and then eventually you'll be able to align those things and be guided by your consciousness, which is your higher self. All right? So, the consciousness and ego, we talked about the differences. Consciousness represents the yin, the light part of you. Ego represents the dark. Okay? This is not really good or bad. All right? This is just contrast we're talking. Consciousness represents oneness, right? Nurturing, selflessness, right? Connection to all things. Ego, separation, right? I am me, you are you, okay? This just creates that separation. Oftentimes, aggression, selfishness, a separation from all. Identity, it creates identity. Your ego is your protector. That's the part of you that feels like it needs to protect itself, right? So protecting yourself is never a wrong thing. Judgment. So what we want to do is balance those things, okay? And recognize that when somebody is coming from a place of consciousness, they are identifying things more as good because they have an understanding of oneness and trust as to what's happening. When somebody identifies something as bad, oftentimes, that's because they're identifying with their ego. You know, they're being led by the ego. So we have to be mindful when we see things from a negative point of view. Just like with manifestation, they always say, focus on gratitude. Because then you align yourself with consciousness. When you align yourself with that, then you are more likely to create right? You step into a very creative space. The universe is neutral, okay? Remember that. So when we talk about God, we say, why is God letting these things happen? It's not God. It's us, right? It is because we're not connected with consciousness. We are identified with ego. When you identify with ego, you create chaos. Consciousness is a creator by nature. The ego is then the destroyer by nature. So when we are identifying with that ego part of us, like many places in the world where there's a lot of war, people are hating one another, wanting to kill and fight one another for various things, that is because they're being led by that ego. In order for you to create peace for yourself, you have to be led by consciousness, right? Remember that your consciousness ultimately, in your story, in your movie, we all live in our own movie, right? You're the star in this movie. If you're led by consciousness, you're the hero. If you're led by ego, you're the villain. So recognize that, all right? So I'm going to leave with this. So I compare it to two things, yourself and the universe. But it's really not a comparison. It's really seeing that you are one. You are the same. You are that. You are the universe. All right? So if you look for God, if you want to look for God, just look in the mirror. All right? Thank you.